Hey Denchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and welcome to my review of the 5th studio album from the legendary DJ and producer DJ Shadow. This one is called The Mountain Will Fall. Now if you guys remember my mid-year review last month, I actually listed this album as one of the ones that I was really looking forward to for the rest of the year, and I gotta take a moment to be a little bit honest. If you're a longtime DJ Shadow fan and you're coming to this review is probably not for you because I haven't necessarily been the biggest DJ Shadow fan for a long time. In fact, I didn't even really start listening to DJ Shadow until recently, but I've been very captivated by his creative use of sampling, and ever since this album was announced, I've been listening to DJ Shadow more and more, going back to his old works like Introducing, which was his most critically acclaimed and arguable best album. If I remember correctly, most of that album was samples from other albums, and was one of the first to do so very successfully. The Mountain Will Fall is DJ Shadow's first studio album since 2011's The Less You Know The Better, and of course, all the big fans of DJ Shadow and fans of electronic music and hip-hop all over the place are going to be very excited for this one, coming from a producer with such a thick background. And like I said, even me, who hasn't necessarily been a fan of DJ Shadow for a long time or really listened to a good chunk of his music, I was excited for this one just because he's a huge name in both scenes. I was especially excited when I saw names like Niels Fromm and Run the Jewels on this one, which on both ends of the spectrum classify this album as both a hip-hop and rap album and an electronic music album, which is something you don't really see a lot in the world other than in the trap genre, and very few producers have been able to combine these in a way that can really captivate both of their audiences. I think earlier this year Flume did a lot of experimentation with that, and that's why Flume crafted arguably one of the best albums of this year with Skin. And in some spots on The Mountain Will Fall, I actually can draw a few comparisons to Flume's album. Now it's in a completely different way, because on Flume's album we didn't see rappers as wonky as Run the Jewels featured on it, and in a lot of places you can't even really compare this album to a Flume album because it's not drop-centric in the slightest. I think one of the things that DJ Shadow did really smart with this album is the fact that only 3 of these tracks were dropped prior to the album's release, and that was the first track on the album, the title track, The Mountain Will Fall, Nobody Speak featuring Run the Jewels, and Ghost Town, which was released on an earlier EP just in 2014. I praise this album for you guys to know enough that this album isn't bad, but the real question is this album amazing? No. Even if it was unintentional, a lot of the beats on this album sound very Flume-esque, kind of taking inspiration in that wonky and future bass music scene. A lot of the times when the beats on this album come in completely offbeat places completely remind me of a lot of what Flume did with Skin. And like I said, there's nothing in here that makes it sound completely rip-off because both artists have completely distinct styles, but there is some very clear influence in certain spots, where you can see that DJ Shadow over the past few years has kind of been absorbing what's kind of growing popular in the music scene and kind of incorporated that into this album. For example, tracks like Mambo on this album remind me heavily of some of Flume's shorter tracks on Skin, with its little squeaky electronic synths flowing through the background, its driving beats and risers going out through the entire track. Even if this wasn't intentional on DJ Shadow's part, it definitely proves that this style is getting more popular and he isn't exactly inventing anything new on tracks like these. On the other hand, I really loved a good chunk of this album. Like I mentioned earlier in this review, I really like how this album combines hip-hop and electronic music sounds to create some kind of even middle ground, and I think the track Bergschrund with Niels Fromm does this really well. I really love the first track, the title track on this album, which has some really creative vocal sampling throughout it. At one point there's a little scream in the background, you can hear the and then the beat kicks in and it's just, orgasmic. One of my other favorites is Nobody Speak featuring Run the Jewels, and Run the Jewels has been one of my favorite hip-hop duos basically since they released Run the Jewels 2. I think one of the downfalls about Run the Jewels is that they continue in that same flip-flop pattern with LP and Killer Mike just going back and forth and then coming together on a break. It's been featured on some of their more recent collaborations like their one with Mike Snow earlier this year, but that's really the only thing that bugs me about their feature on it. I really like their creative wordplay on this one. They also poked some fun at Donald Trump for saying that he would marry his daughter on this one, which I thought was pretty funny. Another one of my favorites on this album is the track 3 Ralphs, which although I didn't think the production was anything fantastic on some aspects of it, this track has probably the heaviest bass I've ever heard in a track before. This is another spot where the offbeat snares and drums kind of come in and remind me of Flume a bit, but it's not overwhelming in this one. I just really liked what this one was doing. Skipping kind of toward the end of the album, one of my absolute favorites is the track Ashes to Oceans, which growing up near the Maine coast, I always really loved the sounds of the ocean and everything, and that's featured as a sample on this track, actually making for something pretty emotional, along with a distorted piano and some snares in the background that sound, although out of place for what you'd expect from a track like this, actually fits in pretty well. This is probably one of the more unique songs on the record. It features some of the heaviest sampling out of the entire thing. There's some clap samples that come in some way through, which makes a drastic change from where the track was going before. From its somber nature in the beginning, from there it kind of goes into a more upbeat, happy vibe, and kind of has these pitch risers going up and down and up and down and all over the place. And then from there, once again, we get into the kind of that somber feel that the beginning took us to. There's some clear jazz influence here and trumpet samples, kind of flowing back into that soft piano sound, and then goes back into the sounds of the ocean once again. Another one of the really interesting ones on this record is the track Suicide Pact. This one makes for a really interesting closer because a lot of times when people close albums, they tend to do it on a more upbeat note, but on this one, it takes a much darker twist, and this is probably the darkest track on the record. The dark string plucks in the background of this one almost sound like they could have been sampled from an Alfred Hitchcock thriller, which I thought was extremely cool and made me leave the album with basically wanting more of this thing. Like I mentioned in my Skin album review with the Tiny Cities track featuring Beck, I feel like the production definitely left me off with that same feeling, and it definitely returns with this album. Although I didn't think this album was amazing, I definitely didn't think it was bad in the slightest. I actually really like this album quite a bit as compared to a lot of the things that have dropped recently. I am feeling a solid 7 on this, and I hope you guys are encouraged to check this one out because it's definitely really good. Make sure to hit that Spotify link in the description so you can go hear it, and if you have listened to it already, let me know what you think in the comments. Anyway, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll see you later. Peace.